Hello, I'm Celeste here from Hex and Arcane, and I am here with another true crime case. And this one's kind of a classic. It goes far back, and it was actually the case that inspired the movie Reefer Madness. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about Victor Licata, who was an American mass murderer who is famous for having killed his family with an axe in Tampa, Florida on October 16th, 1933. So to be a mass murderer, I believe you have to kill 5 people. And that's what he did. So Victor was born on June 25th of 1916. He grew up in a poor working class family, and he showed signs of mental instability from a young age. He was also described as a quiet and reserved individual who mainly kept to himself. Now, when they say mental instability, I don't know what that means. I couldn't find an exact definition for what they meant by mental instability, and there are a lot of things that could be considered mental instability, especially at the time. So, was he depressed? I don't know. I don't know how severe it was or what it entailed. But Victor was 21 years old at the time of the killings, and 2 weeks after he killed his family, he was declared unfit to stand trial for reasons of insanity and was committed to the Florida State Hospital for the insane. At one point, he escaped from the hospital but was later recaptured and sadly took his own life after that on December 4th of 1950. So we're going to kind of go back and talk about the crime itself. With some similarities to the tale of Lizzie Borden, Victor used an axe to murder his parents, his 2 brothers, and his sister as they slept. It was determined that all of them had died from blows to the head. Police found Victor the next morning in a bedroom in the family's home. He appeared to be confused and was wearing a clean-pressed shirt and trousers, but underneath these clean clothes, his body was covered in blood. So it seems like he committed the murders and then changed his clothes, but did not try to clean himself up, did not shower, and he appeared to be confused or disoriented when they found him. Victor denied killing anyone at the time, but he did describe a dream that he'd had where his parents, now this is a terrifying dream, his parents pulled him from his bed in his dream, held him against the wall, and sawed off his arms with a knife. They then jabbed wooden arms with iron claws into the stumps while his siblings stood by and laughed. Victor then described how in the dream he grabbed a funny axe, and he described it as being rubbery, like something from a cartoon. And using that funny axe, he knocked his family members unconscious and then wrung the blood from it like it was a wet towel. How he did this with his arms having been cut off and replaced with wood and iron or whatever is something I guess can only be explained by the physics of dreams. The Tampa Times recounted this dream and attributed it to a combination of, and I quote, raw moonshine and dope. It seems pretty clear from the records at the time that Victor was suffering from a pre-existing mental illness. However, the press and the police both made claims that he was addicted to marijuana. Although there was no clear basis for these claims, he could have been using marijuana. I'm sure it seems like he was using marijuana. I don't know to what extent. But there was no real basis found to the claims that he was addicted to marijuana or using it that heavily. The day after the murders, October 17th of 1933, the Tampa Bay Times wrote, W.D. Bush, city chief detective, said he had made an investigation prior to the crime and learned that the slayer had been addicted to smoking marijuana cigarettes for more than 6 months. But then one day after that, the chief of the Tampa Bay Police Department appeared to downplay the role of drugs in the murders, despite having pledged himself to the cause of marijuana prohibition. In a statement from the chief, he was quoted as saying, "Maybe the weed only had a small indirect part of the alleged insanity of the youth, but I am declaring now and for all time that the increasing usage of this narcotic must stop and will be stopped." A couple days later, an editorial appeared that was entitled, "Stop This Murderous Smoke." The author called for the prohibition of marijuana, with one part of the article quoted as saying, "It may or may not be wholly true that the pernicious marijuana cigarette is responsible for the murderous mania of a Tampa young man in exterminating all the members of his family within his reach. Whether or not the poisonous, mind-wrecking weed is mainly accountable for the tragedy, its sale should not be and should never have been permitted here or elsewhere." Due to being declared unfit to stand trial, Victor was never prosecuted for murdering his family, and he was diagnosed with, let's see if I can say this right, dementia praecox with homicidal tendencies. They described his condition as being acute and chronic and overtly psychotic, as well as being subject to hallucinations accompanied by homicidal impulses and periods of excitement. There was no reference made to marijuana in the psychiatric records at all. On October 15th of 1945, Victor Licata escaped the hospital along with 4 other patients. The other 4 were recaptured fairly quickly, but Victor Licata managed to elude the police for years. So he escaped in 1945, and in 1950, he decided to visit his cousin. And he was captured by police with the help of the cousin at that point. So he was out for about 5 years. He was then taken to the Florida State Prison, and 4 months later, he committed suicide by hanging himself. There is evidence that Victor had a long history of mental illness, and that a year before he committed the murders, the Tampa police filed a petition to have him institutionalized for mental illness. However, the petition ended up being withdrawn when his family promised to be more watchful of him and his behavior. So it seems like it was clear that the family knew that he was having issues. The police were aware that he was having issues to the point where they wanted to step in and do something. But the family wanted to try to keep him in hand himself, so they thought they were capable of watching out for him and keeping everybody safe. There was also a history of mental illness in Victor's family, and it was speculated that he inherited what was dubbed as insanity from his parents, who were first cousins. So they said because they were first cousins, he was insane. One of Victor's brothers that was killed in the attack had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and his paternal granduncle and 2 of his paternal cousins had been institutionalized for mental illness. Again, this mental illness was not specified, especially in the 1930s or before that, whenever this had happened. There were a lot of different things that could get you institutionalized that I think today would not be the basis for institutionalization. I think, today we would just maybe provide more support, more help, different treatments, medication, things like that. So I don't know if they were depressed, if they had schizophrenia, hallucinations, if, they just were troublemakers or something. I don't know. It could have been any number of things. However, none of these facts regarding the history of mental illness gained traction the way the claims of marijuana use did. So proponents of the anti-drug laws used this case as evidence that marijuana could cause criminal behavior and insanity, and the case also inspired media depictions of people who were driven to criminal insanity by the use of what was labeled evil weed. One of the better known instances was the 1936 propaganda film originally called Tell Your Children, that is commonly known as Reefer Madness. There were other novels and articles written about the case that discussed the influence of marijuana on youth and the dangers associated with marijuana use. This led to the creation of a bill known as the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which gave the federal government control over marijuana and ultimately led to the criminalization of marijuana. Now, I'm not going to get into opinions of marijuana. I don't think that's relevant. I do think it's relevant, though, that it doesn't seem like the facts of the case were relevant. It was just that there was something that people could pick up on to further an agenda, and that's sadly what happened here. So, what do you think about the case of Victor Licata? Do you think let me know in the comments. Do you think that he was insane? Do you think that he should have received more treatment? Do you think today things would have been handled differently? If there were signs of the mental illness the year before, like the police had stepped in and wanted to institutionalize him, do you think marijuana had anything to do with it? I'd like to hear your opinions.